Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. And I'm honored and a bit intimidated to be doing this. Uh, if possible, those of you who I can't see various symbols or names,
Oh, they're just not lit. They'll be
they'll be
lighting up.
coming in whenever they feel like it.
Well, they're in probably, but just don't have their.
Right. Okay. Well, then that's that. Okay, great. Great to see you all. Um, okay. I have found my practice in the last several weeks quite confusing. And a lot has been going on in my practice and in the world outside, which has been very intense and often very upsetting. And I find that whatever I want to say, especially about Dharma, feels like it wants to end with a question mark. And so it seemed like a good time to talk about not knowing, because I don't find myself, if I'm honest with myself, feeling that I know very much. Um, if I'm honest with myself, I also know that I have a feeling that I'm knowing all the time, and that is usually accompanied by suffering. Um, and this has been um, what we've, during this time we've had in Santa Barbara several talks by our leader Pamela Nenson, um, and they've been very powerful for me. And the first, she started with the five remembrances, which are all beings, all things are of the nature to grow old, to get sick, to die, to be separated from everything they love, and all that's our own possessions are our actions, karma. Um, and she asked, well, how do you deal with this? I mean, they're not the cheeriest things to remember, but they're true, is the problem. And what came to my mind was just return to just this. And that became a kind of powerful koan for me, return to just this. And I was occupied for, uh, very occupied, gave a talk about it up there. And then she talked about not knowing. And she talked about it starting with a koan from the Book of Serenity. Very simple. It's a young monk named Feigin on a pilgrimage, which was a standard practice at that time. People would travel from one monastery to another and perhaps do a practice period at each and study with the teachers, and then go on to the next monastery. And of course, it's nice to remember that in Tang Dynasty China, they were going on foot. And or maybe they had a carriage or whatever, but it was taking a long time. It was a very, they really had to put themselves out for it. It's not like taking your car and coming here for a session, or even like taking your car and going to Tassajara for a session or practice period. It was intense. And so when Fayan was about to leave a monastery where he had done a practice period, and the abbot came up and he said, what's the purpose of pilgrimage? Why are you doing all this? And Fayan looked in his mind and he said, I don't know. And then the teacher Daisang said, not knowing is most intimate. And Fayan wound up staying at that monastery and became a successor of Daishan. And actually, Fayan, I believe, founded one of the five schools of Zen, the Fayan school. And of those five schools, presently remaining are Soto and Rinzai. And of course, we're in the Soto school. So, why go on pilgrimage? Why practice? You know? And Fayan said, not knowing. And that's a expression that's kind of, I think, very big in Zen. Just this is very big. Not knowing is big. Most intimate is big. Used frequently. And I think that they're all pointing to the same thing. Maybe from different perspectives, but they're really all pointing at the same thing, whatever that might be. And so our topic is returning to not knowing, which I think is important because, certainly speaking from my own experience, I'm in a state of knowing a whole lot. It's an occupational disease of professors, whether retired or not. They're supposed to know, which is very dangerous. And so returning to a state of not knowing, what would that look like? What would it be? And actually, such things are really, you could even say return. Returning is another of those words. Because our practice, so maybe returning to not knowing would look like, I noticed that I thought I knew something. Thought of knowing arose. And so I said, oh, okay, thought of knowing arose. I'm aware of it. I make an effort gently not to grab onto it, which would involve probably thinking more thoughts about what I know, just getting into a stream of thought, or not grabbing like that, or not rejecting, which might involve me with, oh my God, this is terrible, I'm a bad practitioner, I had this thought. And then I'd be involved in a cycle of thinking about, I'm a bad practitioner. And then I return to my practice of being there with my body and my breath and awareness of my mind. And so that practice of, of being lost and waking up to, oh, I'm lost, and returning, it seems, in my experiences, like what my zazen is. I'm constantly getting lost in thought, I'm noticing it and returning. And that's true throughout the day, actually, if I look at my life, at my mind during the day. And so returning is very what we do again and again. And returning is utterly coexistent with being lost. I mean, returning has no meaning unless there's a point at which you were lost. So in the three of them seems to me, I mean, we'll see if Peter and Jane kind of agree, kind of what our practice consists of: being lost, waking up and returning, and getting lost again, waking up, returning. So what would it look like to return to not knowing? So, okay, so we have this instance. We see something we know, we try not to grab, etc. That's actually a very idealistic description of practice. Most of my practice on the cushion, I'm just, whirling around in thought. But when I succeed in, even very briefly, waking up, the thought arose, I know that. And let me just be there with that for a bit. And, where does that come from? Well, if I know something, who's knowing? Who's grabbing onto that? What or who is grabbing on? It knows. And you have this idea in my mind when it, on the fairly rare occasions when it happens, that my mind is just a little softer, just a little more relaxed. And the thought arises, well, I think I know this, but like Suzuki Roshi might say, not always so. It's not saying this is a wrong thought necessarily, but it's not always the accurate thought. It's not quite right, very likely. And then when we realize that things constantly change, then we realize, okay, maybe the thought I have is utterly true at this infinitesimal moment, 1/10,000th of a second. The next 1/10,000th of a second, something has changed. So whatever I knew 1/10,000th of a second before is not quite right now. And so, in that sense, if you think about it, we really, our state of being is not knowing, at least not knowing precisely what's going on. And we could compare that to the story you probably all know of the blind man and the elephant. So the blind man, actually, the Buddha asked the blind man, no, someone, anyway, it doesn't matter. So the blind men were brought to an elephant, and they were each shown the trunk or the leg or the tail. And then they were asked, what's an elephant? And they each had a different answer. And so it says, the one who had the tusk felt a plowshare, the one with the foot a pillar, the one with the tail a pestle, and so on. And they were each totally convinced they were right. And they started to argue and fight among themselves. And so that didn't work out well. The blind men were in a state of knowing, but they knew only part of the truth. I mean, maybe an elephant's tusk is sort of like a plowshare, but that's not the whole elephant. And they missed the whole elephant. It's kind of natural because they were blind, but we're all kind of blind. We all have limitations. But why did they get angry? I mean, someone said the elephant is like a pillar, and then the other one said no, and the guy who said the elephant's like a pillar got mad. Why? The other guy just simply said, no, it's like a pestle. And so fear is a big deal in returning to not knowing. And the question comes on, what are we afraid of? I mean, we all want to be right in what we think we know. But then, what's the most profound thing we think we know? Probably, I'll put out, maybe for me, it's the idea of a separate self. I'm separate and I know that, and Joel is Joel, and Joel thinks this and knows this and whatever. And the problem is, on some level, we all kind of know, even if on an intellectual level, that that's not quite true. This Joel is not separate from everything else, from you guys, from Jane, from Peter. And maybe I know that intellectually, but deep down, it's more doubtful. And it gets confusing because there is something, I think, that can be identified that we might call a self. It's not a problem, it's just a fact that it's absolutely inseparable from everything else. And that leads, not realizing that leads to a lot of trouble. And you might know from Buddhist literature the image of the diamond net of Indra, where the universe is pictured as like a web of connections, like sort of like a spider's web, and there are places where the little strings coincide at and there's a jewel in each one, and the jewel in each one reflects all the other jewels, and it's an infinite net, so there are infinite number of jewels, and all those jewels are reflected in any one jewel, in any one of these nodes of the net. But if you think about it, the jewel that's been reflected itself contains the reflections of all the other jewels. So you get infinity of infinity of infinity piling on each other. And so from that point of view, the world is an infinite interpenetration of everything, of infinite numbers of things. And so if we think about this, can we really take the stance other than not knowing? Compared to that, that's the universe. Knowing is pretty doubtful. So this is all very easy to say and very hard to experience. And so for me, what I can try to do is realize when I know, when I think I know, and I might believe it very strongly. Um, and I might look at the precepts and act according to it if the precepts seem not to counterindicate it, but it's not quite right. There's some other perspective that's valid. And to know that and be there. And that leads me to softer mind, soft mind, less rigidity, more openness, maybe a little less self. So to return at the end to the koan, so Phaon looked in his mind and couldn't find anything. So what is the purpose of pilgrimage? He looked in his mind. Why am I doing this? Um, Apparently he couldn't find anything. Maybe he couldn't find any Phaon particularly. And so all he could say is, I don't know. And the teacher said, not knowing is most intimate. And so, if you think about it, imagine what he could have said. He could have said, well, I'm on pilgrimage to relieve my own suffering. Or he could say, I'm on pilgrimage so I'm able to release the suffering of others. Or I'm on pilgrimage to understand the Buddha Dharma more. Or, very perhaps unfortunately, I'm on pilgrimage to get enlightened. Despite the unfortunate nature of that last one, all of these are perfectly good resolutions, perfectly good motivations to go on pilgrimage. They're excellent. But could it be that for Phaon, it became like the blind men with the elephant? They all might be true, but they're all not really quite the whole thing. And if you look at the whole thing of why here I am on pilgrimage, what you wind up seeing is something like the diamond net of Indra, which is like totally unknowing. I mean, but like all the causes and conditions of everything have conspired so that for some reason you decided to do this pilgrimage. And so he said, I don't know. And then Daizang said, not knowing is most intimate. And so I'll stop there. Thank you. And questions, comments?
Peter, would you read the numbers there so I can complete it here?
Okay, now I guess I'm no good at these things. I guess I should look at a participant. I don't know. I mean, advise me. What should I do? You can raise your hands. Okay. But whatever you want. Oh, okay. Hi. 2 questions. Oh, am I supposed to do something? Chris?
Yeah, just calling people. So just like you did just now. I
Okay,
think
cool.
it's I've always so first of all, I just want to say how much I love the koan that you mentioned because
Great.
not knowing is most intimate is one of the most consistently beautiful and poignant koan phrases that I keep discovering the truth of over and over again in practice.
Yes.
And and also it's kind of funny because we have this intellectual capacity, we have this ability to rationalize and abstract and make patterns and all this stuff.
Yes, we do.
But if we ever use it, we're somehow putting ourselves separately from the world, and it's kind of a shame. But it's also it's not that we're putting it's maybe it's that our greater capacity is just the presence, and we have when we're trying to do trigonometry and make planes fly, it's very important that we use our abstract thinking, or if we're trying to compose a piece of music,
Right.
helps to remember like numbers and various things. Um, and then, but when we're actually enjoying the music, or we're actually, sitting in an airplane, just experiencing it directly without intellectualizing it is, and it's weird because he says most intimate doesn't necessarily mean better, but I think we often jump to the conclusion that, oh, it's preferable to
Right.
not know or to, and I don't think that's necessarily true. even though I totally get why it seems that it must be.
That's terrific. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and it's a very important point. Uh, there's nothing wrong with knowing. There's nothing wrong with thinking. Nothing, that's part of the diamond net of Indra. That we think, that's part of, as it were, the elephant. That happens. It just happens. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, it's good because it shows that our brains are not diseased. We have thoughts. If our brains were not working well, there would be no thought, but that's not what we're aiming for here. So I think that's a very important question always in practice, and important to remember. We're trying to have access to realize that that's not all there is. There are the other parts of the elephant. There's the
Um,
whole thing. Yeah.
I was just gonna say I recently I was in a relationship and now I'm not anymore. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I saw, one of the new things I saw now hearing that koan was um, how it can apply to a relationship, how how it felt like, and I know he was not intending anything of the thing. It's just like he doesn't have any practice in Zen, so this concept would probably just not occur to him naturally. But basically, when I'd hear him talking or saying something, and it gave me the impression of like he has a very firm idea of who I am, that
Right.
had a certain kind of feeling where I would, again, try not to like rank things or come up with preferences, but I definitely would have appreciated more of, and not that it sounds like I'm casting aspersions. I'm not, but
Right.
it definitely sort of hammers home that notion that when you don't come up with a framework, an intellectual, imaginative, abstract doppelganger of the person who's right in front of you, then you actually have more of a chance of actually, or of have, again, a more intimate connection, a more direct experience of that, and how it's like, oh, he's relating to his mental version of me
Hmm.
more than he's relating to the actual person, and that's just a foible, and it's a hazard of the road. It comes with the territory, and that's all. But that was an interesting new turn on that notion.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that would be the next talk of, of most intimate. Uh, and, I mean, yeah, I mean, as soon as we think we know anything, we're cut off from something. And so, absolutely, the to be the more the less you know about the other person, the more intimate you are. I mean, facts or something, or what he said yesterday or 2 minutes ago, but ultimately, there's this vast not knowing. And he has the same thing with you. And that's the diamond net of Indra. And that's where our lives happen. And so we have an aspiration to be intimate. That's an example of benefit of practice. I sort of, you know, I have hesitation there because it sounds like a gaining idea, but that we are trying to return to a state where we, where the everything we might think we know is not quite right. It's not necessarily bad or wrong. Yeah, I think you're on. I think you should give the next talk. I mean, all the stuff you're bringing up is, just beautiful, beautiful. Okay, hi, Michael.
I am surprised by how your talk was appropriate for me. I normally don't bring up my personal life in these conversations, but I went through something recently that your talk actually gave me a little bit of clarity on.
Yeah.
Some of the people in the Sangha know that I've been dealing with a lot of health problems, and it's been going on for years and years, and I've seen several specialists. And finally, this last Monday, I saw the top person in the field, and he said, I don't know. I don't know why you're going through what you're going through. I don't know what's causing this. And I was angry.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized my anger was based on the fact that we use knowledge to make reality predictable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do.
You know, you know something, so now it's not something that's going to surprise you.
Right.
And I found that my attachment to trying to figure out after 12 years of doctors, I mean, I've gone to the very best specialists.
Right.
They can all prove I'm going through what I'm going through, but they can't prove why it's happening.
Yes.
And to have them finally say, we don't know, we don't understand why you're going through this. All we can do is watch. And I realized that my anger was based on the fact that I wanted something predictable. I wanted, you know, and realizing that somebody says, I know what's going on is kind of, you know, well, you don't know what's going on. You only know what's going on by what the information you have.
That's right.
And so some of my Zen lessons have been very painful. And this was one of them, because as I listened to you talk now, did I understand right that you were a teacher or a professor at one time, or?
I was a professor of music. I taught music composition, writing music.
It was an interesting conversation for you to give, because you have to present yourself as knowing what you're talking about.
It's terrible. It's
yeah. And so, you know, I realize, you know, they say, you know, all doctors are practicing medicine. Doesn't mean they know it. They're just learning it. They're practicing at the same time you are.
That's right.
And so your talk gave me some tools to work with, because the minute you say you know something, you're no longer in the moment. You're no longer, you are taking yourself out of the now.
That's right.
And so, you know, I finally realized with all these doctors, okay, I'm going to have to face what's going on by myself. It's just something I'm going to have to deal with. It is my koan.
Yes.
Serious koan, but it's my koan.
That's right.
And, you know, I'm no longer angry at the doctors. I realize, hey, they only know what they know. And even they say we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And so when somebody says, I know something, I now take it with a grain of salt. You know, based on your experiences, but that doesn't mean that's my experience and that's my reality. Absolutely. And so, you know, it's amazing that your talk, because I appreciate it. It really was, it's helping me learn to just accept what's going on and live in the moment. And we can't know. We don't know. And anybody that says they do, you have to look at them kind of askance and go, oh yeah? You know,
yeah,
so,
right. Definitely.
So thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Sandy.
Oh, should I respond to Michael?
Oh,
Not necessary.
Well, I just
Of
really
course.
appreciate it, and you've said it all. And thank you, Sandy.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for the talk. I really liked it.
Thank you.
And it was genuinely helpful. And I wanted to say that you have a very nice and personable way of speaking to us. And it was a refreshing talk, a little different kind of talk. So thank you for that. And what the first thing in your talk that really hit home was when you started talking about on the cushion, you know, the circle of of going through this thought coming up, and you're just grabbing onto it, and then finally you're letting it go, and it's just a constant circle.
Right.
And that is my experience.
Mhm.
That, and it's always been my experience. It was worse at the beginning of my practice. It's getting a little bit looser now, where I have actual moments of, should I say, I have, you called it where you had a softer feeling when you were able to let go and of the, to me, it's like a refreshing pause, you know, where that just for a few moments, I'm just here in the now. And it's just such a nice feeling. It's, and then when you're talking about, we don't really know.
Yeah.
If we all knew what was say the truth, um, where would the excitement in life be? Where would the questing be? I mean, those are the things that kind of
Yeah.
make life exciting. That you want some knowledge, you want to study this, or you want to go somewhere and experience, on a trip. And it's also like the beginner's mind, the questing mind, asking
Sure.
questions.
Absolutely.
Without that, you're taking one of those jewels and crushing it with your foot and saying it doesn't matter,
Well,
so
you
it
know,
has a point.
oh yeah. I mean, I love that. It's fantastic, and that's so important. At one point in there, you used the word worse. I think
Worse.
worse. Like this is not as good as that. I think
Oh.
in terms of when you're in a stream of thought,
Mhm.
that's worse than a state of sort of not knowing, of softer
What's
mind.
a different feeling?
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't feel as good. You notice that that doesn't feel as good. But there's nothing worse. It's about it. And there's nothing, there sort of is. But it's like they're both there. They're both in the
Sure.
Dharma of Inter. They're both in the Buddha Dharma. And I mean, Peter, Jane, and I were just talking about this wonderful text, the Xing Xing Ming, which starts, "The great way is not difficult, it just avoids picking and choosing." And it's a great text.
Yeah, I
And
love it.
yeah, I love it too. And we're talking about what is the picking and choosing. It's not, I think, deciding whether, oh, am I going to have chocolate or vanilla tonight for dessert? I don't think that's probably what he's talking about. I think it's like, okay, so here I spent a period of zazen with my mind wandering all over, obsessing with whatever. And and then the thought arises, that's worse. And that thought itself is picking and choosing. It's picking that you like much better the time when your mind is a little softer, and
Mhm.
and that you are more in a state of not knowing, and you prefer that, and so you pick and choose. And I, in my experience, the state of not knowing is much happier than the state of being. But then you pick and choose between being happy and not being happy. It is what it is, just this. And somehow for me, it's helpful for me to try, well, basically it winds up to notice when I'm picking and choosing. So I notice, oh, I've been sitting for half an hour and just obsessing. And okay. And then the thought arises, that's not good. That's picking and choosing. Okay, that's what happened. Just this is I spent a half hour, entwined in all this thought. Okay. The intention, I think, and the returning is the key thing. And in practice, and as I said, that involves being lost. You see what I mean? So maybe I don't know if I'm addressing exactly what you're asking, but I just wanted to put that in because I think it's just another thought to say this is worse.
Yeah.
It's just what it is.
Oh, yeah.
Did I
Thank
answer
you.
the question?
Yeah, you did on that, but I wanted to make another comment.
Yeah.
Chris, you were talking about being in and out of relationship. Um, and in the past, I look at relationships to the point where I get to meet someone and, spend time with them. And I believe, which is a false belief, that I'm learning to know them, you know, more intimately
Mhm.
than I would if, just casual acquaintances. And I find myself, I've judged in the past and that type of thing. And then I realized that, when you brought that up, um, actually, to me, one of the nicest things of relationship is that you don't know
Yeah.
and you get to know.
Right.
So you work towards you have intimacy and you work towards getting to know someone's motivations or what makes them happy, and you know what's gone on in their life, and that in itself is like a journey, and it's a beautiful journey.
Yes.
It doesn't always work out, but it's a beautiful journey.
Yes.
So yeah,
I think that's
and yeah, I think it's a great way to spend your time getting to know someone.
absolutely. I mean, I think it's also like, you know, in a sense, like I wouldn't say it's not getting intimate. I would say more like it's beginning to get intimate. I'm getting to be intimate with one aspect or another aspect of the
Mhm.
person. And so it's wonderful, but it's like there's always that thing, there's always more. There's always,
Mhm.
I see this about the person, but this is a wonderful mystery. And this is wonderful being in this relationship because of more and more these mysteries will be revealed, like the blind man going to different parts of the elephant, so to
Right,
speak.
but there'll still always be an unknown.
Yes, and that's a good
Yeah.
thing. It would be kind
Yes.
of a boring relationship if you knew it, and that's that. You
Yeah.
know, we have the spark, the excitement. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Rachel.
Rachel?
And the screen may freeze, so tell me and I'll retreat. Thank you.
Don't retreat.
Well, the sound and the screen will freeze out. I'll be forced to. Thank you, Jill. I was thinking when you were talking about knowing and not knowing that, mind the gap in England when they talk about going platform, that sometimes there's never utter knowing or utter not knowing, and that most of life and practice seems to be between that, and it's as though sometimes there's a tension. I mean, perhaps like an instrument, but there's a certain tension
Mhm.
between uncertainty and not knowing, and curiosity
Mhm.
and fearlessness in a
Yes,
certain
right,
sense.
right.
And it really is kind of fascinating if you become interested in it and realizing it's like finding balance. You very rarely are at rest. You're always out of balance but you're always finding the balance. And
Absolutely.
I just realized listening to you how much more mobile it is. I mean, you think about practice, you're sitting on the cushion.
Yeah.
I don't think I can have a mind more active than when I appear to be absolutely silent
Yes.
and still. But that's characteristic, really.
Yep.
And you mentioned something about those moments of being softer.
Yes.
That at those moments, that's when that curiosity and interest and awareness and lack of focus on self
Yes.
seems to disseminate and is most possible.
Yes.
But I don't know how you map that. So thank you.
You're welcome. I wouldn't try to map it. That's sort of pinning it down maybe to knowing. I think what you said was beautiful. Yeah, I mean, you talked about the tension. I'm trying to remember exactly how you put it. Do you recall that place?
Walk between the two.
Between knowing and not knowing. Okay. Of course, it's like the same tension, I think, of being lost and returning. You know, we're lost in knowing, we return to not knowing, from a Buddhist point of view. Maybe you know, you gotta watch out. Maybe because we can't always be in. At some point, we have to know something. The question I think the main point for me right now is we know it's incomplete. It's not quite right. And that gives a spark, that gives a life. If we knew it and that was that, that would be kind of dead in a way. And I think very fearful. That was another thing you mentioned. I think
Fearless.
yes. Well, that's right. The state of that rigidity, the state of knowing is, I think, fearful, and the state of not knowing is fearless. And because I think one reason we grab on to knowing is we're afraid. There's a kind of security in I know, and but it's never quite right. Does that make sense? Is that helpful for you? Okay, okay.
Mark.
Mark. Uh, Muted, I think.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Cool.
I just first off, before I start talking, I just want to know how far is everyone prepared to go off schedule, because we're our beginning of practice time by a few minutes.
Okay, well,
So,
good
are we?
good question.
We have two people still.
Okay, so I guess maybe the two people and then we move on to the next. Okay, okay, good question.
Okay, that wasn't what I wanted to ask you though.
Okay.
It's very, very nice listening to this. Where do you pick a place to jump in? There's so many. The thing that I started realizing, I believe, is that this not knowing and wanting to know, the search, wanting to find the solidifier thoughts and to have predictions and to move on and to have a nice mental model of the world. I think our bodies have fooled us a bit. It's our bodies because we, this is what we've inherited from the long line of life that's survived, is that we have rewards, we have punishments, and we go in between, and we remember our, cellularly, we remember our punishments for sure and our rewards, and we naturally, our minds are influenced to follow in that way. And when we sit a long time and we kind of detach and our mind softens, we've loosened a lot of the connections of this, our organism. We cannot know.
We cannot know when we loosen the connections of the
Oh
organism.
no, we can be in the state of not knowing.
Right, when we've loosened that.
Yes.
Right, and yet that is necessary.
Yes, you can't there unless you come from there back there. And then cycle back again because you forget.
Right. I think it's we come back to that point. There's nothing wrong with knowing. Maybe it can lead to things that are very, very unwholesome, to put it very mildly. Like Hitler knew, and that didn't work out well at all.
Right.
And so knowing is very dangerous, but that cellular memory, I mean, like, when we were in the caves, we had to know there's a saber-toothed tiger there, and we'd better take care of ourselves. And that's really a good thing. We have to do it. When we cross a street, we have to watch out for the cars. Otherwise, we might get killed or hurt. If we were in the sublime state of not knowing, we might not notice that the car is coming and we might harm ourselves. So, in my experience, I mean, we're really talking about hardcore absolute, as it were, and we can't live there. But we can live a whole lot better when we have some degree of access to it. Does that help?
It's wonderful. Yes. And I'll leave it at that. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think June
She had her name up. Yeah.
June?
Jane had it up.
Oh, no, it's okay. I don't want to
It's Jane, go
delay
ahead.
the practice.
No, it's fine to do it. You're the last one, so please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to share that in my past, I was talking to my friend and I was complaining about my relationship at that time with my partner. And one thing he said to me really stuck. He said, "Don't underestimate your partner." And that was like years ago, many, many years ago. And I think the reason it stuck with me is because I think I was choosing to limit my intimacy with that person by defining that person with my limited knowledge. And I think in that urge to define someone came from my insecurity about believing that my needs won't be met.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yes.
your talk really gave me some insight about,
Oh,
that fear
that's right.
of uncertainty. It really comes from
Yeah.
not really understanding that your urge to define comes from that fear.
Oh,
And you think that that's like a definite requirement.
right.
And when that exists, everything just seems black and white.
Right, I agree entirely, and I think that's really the point here, when it's comforting to define and it relieves fear and it binds us and limits our intimacy. Is
Yes.
has that spark of unknowing. You never know, and so I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and only when that relationship ended, I could see more in retrospect.
Yeah.
But what if I could see that when I was actually in it? That would have been wonderful.
It would be wonderful, and it is what it is, and uh, I wouldn't dwell there. It's just pain.
Right.
It's in the past, and
Yes.
so you express, you live in the present, and you learn from the past, and who knows what
Yes.
the future is? I've gotten a
Right.
call from partners from 30 years earlier, say hi. I mean, and it didn't break up well. It was a mess. And so you never know. I mean, there's a connection, but
Right.
not to dwell on it. It arises, let it go. It's in the past. But you learned. You learned to love.
Yes, and it seems like sometimes there's a timeline that we can control.
Yeah.
You just have to learn as you go.
I don't know that we ultimately can control anything,
Right.
but this timeline in which we're enmeshed and in which our actions play a big part in shaping. And that is true. And to that extent, we influence and to some degree, I suppose you could say, control what happens. We certainly can influence it by acting either in a wholesome way or an unwholesome way. And we try to be wholesome, and it's hard. And sometimes we are, and sometimes we aren't.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes. So,
Okay, thank you all.
thank you.
Wonderful fun. Thank you so much. And thank you for your questions. I just think all of you guys should be giving the talks.
Thanks, Joel. Great talk.
Okay, thank you.
Great discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.